our steering components next. We did our power steering shaft, we did our power steering gearbox. Now we're going to go to the actual components themselves that make these wheels turn. This axle is called your steer axle. Your steer tires, they steer the truck. We're going to say that a lot. Check your steer axle, do this, do that. These are your steer tires, your steer axle. We're just going to list the components to begin with. We're going to say this component here, it's our pitman arm. We got a drag link right here, this big long tube. We've got a control arm right down in here. This is called the control arm. You've got two components that are very hard to see. But if you look kind of where I'm standing, you'll see a real long tube right here. Do you see that? Mm-hmm. Right here. It's a tube about that size in diameter, and it sits right behind your axle, right here. That's called a tie rod. It ties your two steer tires together. It's an easy way to remember it. And your tie rod is attached with tie rod ends. So, you see that? The tie rod right here. The tie rod end is back up in here. Okay. So we're going to list them all. Pitman arm, drag link, control arm, our tie rod, and tie rod ends. Now we're going to describe them, or talk about if there's any problems. They're not cracked or broken. They're properly mounted, secured. They're not bent. They're not broken. Just put all those words out there that you can think of. One of them's got to be right? All right. Then we're going to talk about how they're all connected. They're all connected. See these nuts right here? There's a nut here and one here. See how they're kind of funny looking nuts?
Castle nuts.
They're called castle nuts, exactly. They're called castle nuts because they look like little castle turrets. You can kind of picture that. So we got castle nuts here, one here and one here. They're held into place with these cotter keys, cotter pins, whichever you want to call them. These pins right here. I always call them cotter pins. The book calls them cotter keys. Same thing. Those are just little metal pins that stick in there to keep that castle nut from backing off and your components falling apart. So our cotter keys and castle nuts are all in place. There's nothing missing. There's no missing bolts, nuts, anything like that. And we're going to talk about our joints and sockets. Basically your ball joints. You got a ball joint here between your control arm and your drag link. You got another one back here. You can kind of see the rubber between your pitman arm and your drag link. And just a really short description about those. Your joints and sockets, they're not worn or damaged. That's all I really got to say about those. Is that right? Worn or loose. Okay. Worn or loose. Just say damaged. All right. So that's all your steering components. And when I'm done with this whole side over here, I'll get in there and turn the wheel so you can actually see how all the components work together to make your wheels turn. All right, so next we're going to go to our suspension components. Deep breath. Leaf springs. These are called leaf springs right here. These are your leaf spring brackets. You can see your leaf springs actually attached to these big brackets right here. There's one here, and there's one in the back. So we're going to talk about those leaf spring brackets, leaf spring hangers. Either term you want to use. I think your book uses hangers. So our leaf spring hanger here, it's properly mounted secured. It's not cracked or broken. It's probably mounted secured to our frame with those big bolts. Now those bolts are missing. Then we're going to actually talk about our leaf springs themselves. We want to make sure it's properly mounted secured to our hangers, front and rear. We also want to talk about the fact they're not cracked or broken. Now here's a couple key words. We want to make sure they're not shifted. By shifted I mean, you can see two of them here, they're kind of stacked on top of each other. You don't want them shifted. So they're not cracked or broken, they're not shifted, and they're not missing. Because that would be a bad thing all the way together. Alright, so next we're going to look at our rear hanger back here. We got a spring hanger in front, or bracket. We got a spring hanger in the back. Now coming off that, it's really hard to see, but coming off that is called the shackle. It goes from your bracket, hanging off your shackle, and the shackle attaches the leaf spring. So you got three components there. You only have two here, but back here you can kind of see a piece with two metal edges that come down and attach to your leaf springs themselves.
Where are the two right here?
Here's your leaf spring hanger in front, and the one in the back is way back there.
How about this one right here?
Yep, just follow this leaf spring all the way over, back to there. So you want to talk about your shackle back there too, and you can talk about them at the same time. My leaf hangers and shackles, they're not cracked or broken, probably not secured to the frame, you know, and the usual stuff. We got our leaf springs. Our leaf springs, they're attached to the axle, which is the big piece in the middle that goes from tire to tire, with our saddle and U-bolts. Our saddle is this component right here. This is called your saddle.
That looks like a seat.
Yeah, it does. I wouldn't want to sit on it, but hey. These are your U-bolts. There's one on each side of the saddle. Big, huge U-bolts. Not as funny as I think I am. Big U-bolts. What that does, and there's nuts on the bottom. What it does, it sandwiches your leaf spring to the axle. It's like a sandwich, is all it does. Make sure it doesn't come loose. So we want to talk about all that. Our saddle and our U-bolts, not cracked or broken. They're not missing. The bolts underneath there, if you look way down here, you can see a bolt. They're not missing. They're not cracked or broken. All right. We got one more item of our suspension system in the front on our steer axle, and that is our shock absorber right there. Our shock absorber. It's properly mounted secured on the top with this mounting bracket to our frame. On the bottom, if you look at it, it's attached to the saddle on the bottom. So our shock absorber, it's attached with a mounting bracket to the frame on the top. On the bottom, it's to the saddle. None of the bolts are missing. It's properly mounted secured. Now, our shock absorber also has liquid in it. There's hydraulic fluid in there. So you gotta say it's not leaking. That's all your suspension components. Any questions about those? All good? All right. Am I doing that good, really?
You do.
Well, I got one. How are you supposed to check the leaf springs? I did.
You don't. A lot of these things, you don't have to prove that it's properly mounted secured. You just got to touch it. My leaf spring, it's properly mounted secured. It's not cracked or broken. It's not shifted. There's not any springs missing. That's all you really got to do. I mean, you can sit down there and do this if you want to. I mean, they'll let you. Okay. So next we're going to go to our air brakes.